Good evening and welcome again to Public Perspective. I'm your host, Kevin McDermott. And regular viewers of the show will know we sometimes like to delve back into history. And that's true again tonight. We have with us two representatives, two board members from the Air Classics Museum of Aviation History. So Bill Roth, Ken Kwiatkowski,
Yes.
welcome to the show.
Okay.
Nice
Thank
to
you.
have you here.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah. So let's get a little background first. First of
Okay.
all, what is the museum? Where is it?
Okay.
And then after we get through that, we'll talk about why is it.
Okay. The museum is out at Aurora Airport, which is located in Sugar Grove, Illinois, on Route 30. The airport main entrance is about a mile west of Route 47 and Route 30, and we're on the southwest corner of the airport property.
And if we look this up on the web at airclassicsmuseum.org,
Right,
we'll find a map, right?
You'll find a map and directions.
Okay.
And our museum is another mile west of the main entrance. So, and you can see the planes when you drive by. We get lots of people saying, "Oh yeah, I drive by every day." You know, type of
see
thing.
that all the time.
But they never stop. It's
right,
like, stop.
yes, yes. So you can tell them next
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
Make sure. So what does the museum? What purpose does it serve? Why did you?
It's
create
to
this?
preserve the history of aviation and to educate people on the history and the importance of aviation through history and stuff. Especially, we have a lot of artifacts from Vietnam, World War II, and Korea.
In fact, most of your collection is military aircraft, right?
Most of them are military aircraft. That is correct.
Yeah. Is there a reason for that? Is that
Well, we have an agreement, a loan agreement with the Navy. So we have a few of our aircraft are on loan from the Navy. They require, of course, they be static, so we can't fly them, unfortunately.
and nobody gets to fly them. It's not like
Nobody,
even,
no.
Okay,
So
they
when
just stay on the
they
ground.
were taken apart by aircraft movers and then put back together when they showed up. And it's not easy to do, so that's a very specialized trade.
And the Navy is actually very particular. They send a group of inspectors out every several years from Pensacola, from the museum in Pensacola, to look at your aircraft that they've gotten loaned to you. They go through with a fine-tooth comb, look in every little nook and cranny to make sure that you're taking good care of it. There's no excessive rusting or anything of that nature. And then about 3-4 months later, you get a report saying that you're doing a good job.
or maybe not.
Or not.
Well,
if
and
that's the case,
they've sometimes come back and said, okay, yeah, you need to do a little
few
better
things.
on that. We have to actually take pictures every year and send them to Pensacola, and they review them.
So how many of the aircraft in your collection are on loan versus stuff that you may own?
We have 4 on loan from the Navy. We have 1 on loan to the city of Aurora from the Air Force. And when we moved out to the Aurora Airport in '98, they pulled it out of a park and they lent it to us. And then about 6 years ago, the Air Force got on Aurora's case because it's loaned to them, saying you need to take care of it. And Aurora approached us and said, would you help us out and take care of it? So we've been clean.
Yeah.
There's a lot of maintenance on the planes to keep them nice looking because for some reason birds like to attack. And so there's a lot of cleaning involved on the aircraft. To
Continual
keep
cleaning, I'm sure.
And
yes.
every little hole on an aircraft, if a bird can, he'll climb in there
Find
and
it.
make a
Oh.
nest,
Yeah.
which is not good and stuff. So it's a non-ending battle with the...
So, but you've focused mainly on the military aircraft.
Right.
Is there a reason why you haven't brought in civilian aircraft?
Well, limited funds. You know, we're a small museum. We're 100%. We're a 501(c)(3). We got incorporated in 1992, and we're 100% volunteer run. And we get our funds from gate admission, people coming through to visit, membership. We have people pay annual membership and donations. So, you know, we look for donors all the time and trying to expand and try to, you know, the upkeep is important because we need to, but it's also important to tell a story.
And so who tells these stories? You guys, or do you have docents
Well,
there?
we have docents there that tell the story. We have a lot of signage that we've done that, you know, so it's self-toured enabled, and we're working actually right now on a self-tour brochure where we're going to number all the exhibits, and then there'll be a short paragraph on each one of them.
Many of our tour guides are veterans.
People who've actually flown these planes?
Yeah. And,
Or mechanics.
Or mechanics. Both of our Hueys were used in Vietnam. The F-4 Phantom was used, I believe, in Vietnam also. And so they all have history. Our A-7 Corsair was used in the first Gulf War. So these are not just simply planes that don't have a history behind them. They all have history behind them. And the reason that it's mostly geared towards military is that when the quote museum first started, it was back in like 1990, and it started as a flight club for pilots who owned World War II or warbirds, and that's how it pretty much got started until they participated in an air show at DuPage Airport in '92, and things got started to go to DuPage Airport and to actually set up in the museum. So that's pretty much why the slant is more for military, plus also for the educational purposes. I mean, there's not too many places that kids can come and actually go inside of a Huey or stand next to or touch an aircraft, and let alone some of the other exhibits we have. So it's really pretty much an eye-opening experience for younger kids who've really never had that experience
So
before.
you mentioned that the guys who have flown these and club and back in the early 90s, where these pilots came with their own airplanes, right?
Right.
So are there still organizations around them, or are there still pilots around who fly these things? Not the ones you have in
Not,
particular.
it's part of our museum, but yeah,
Right.
there's other clubs in the country that you fly. You see a lot of historical planes. The big where a lot of the planes gather is actually this week and last up at Oshkosh. Where they have hundreds of these old planes coming in, and it takes a lot of work to maintain them. When you have them running, because it's wear and tear, and safety is always a big concern. With
Well, I
older
would
planes.
imagine it's a skill that diminishes over time. I mean, not just in that, if you don't do it yourself, your skills wane.
Right.
But, are young kids learning to fly World War II airplanes? I don't know, I would guess not, but I don't know. Is that something?
It would be more adults probably, because it's not a inexpensive hobby. It's a
Well, flying generally is an expensive hobby.
Well,
right?
it's even more so with
Yeah.
the warbirds. So it's more of a rich man type hobby for flying.
So, but my curiosity is about whether it's a skill that will be passed along. Will we reach a time at some point where nobody knows how to fly these things anymore? Because
Hopefully
nobody's
not, but you never know.
Yeah.
And also parts, over time,
right, it's harder to...
wear out and stuff. I mean, it's interesting though. There are a lot of ingenious people around the world that figure out a way to recreate a part that hasn't been made in 60 years.
Well, in fact, a previous show
Yeah.
a year or so ago, there's a fellow named Chuck Roberts who has his own private collection
Right.
of World War II equipment, not aircraft,
Right.
but tanks and
Right.
armored personnel carriers. And he has his own machine shop
Right.
that he and his
Ex-
team have
exactly.
built because, they have to
Right, right.
recreate these parts that you can't get anymore.
Right.
Right. So I imagine that's very similar. right?
Exact same issue. And
But as
stuff.
far as the pilots go, there are organizations around the country. The Commemorative Air Force is one. Collings Foundation out in Massachusetts that do tours of the warbirds, and they usually have volunteer pilots. So and actually the skills are being passed down from say someone in their 40s or 50s who learned from somebody who actually flew a
Right.
B-25 bomber in World War II.
Right.
And so there's always new other pilots that are getting interested in these organizations, going on tour with these planes and passing down. So I don't think that they're never going to get to the point that there's not ability to fly these aircraft.
Will they be able to continue to get the parts to keep them running?
And maintenance,
yeah.
that's the main thing. Yeah.
Sure, I can see that.
Originally, a lot of our volunteers were World War II vets.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, we just lost our last World War II vet who passed away last year.
Mm-hmm.
And they were very dedicated volunteers, and they had a lot of stories to tell and
Yes,
stuff.
I'm sure.
Part of the reason I joined the museum is I love history, and so I was able to, working with a lot of these World War II veterans, borrow their scrapbooks and pictures and scanned in all their images and some of their maps and stuff. And I have, as part of the museum collection, we have over 2 gig of images that we've collected. And some are one-of-a-kind, unique pictures from when they were in World War II or Korea or Vietnam. I have one who was a B-29 pilot flying out of Burma during World War II, and I have a picture from 1946 when he visited the Taj Mahal, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah. Well, speaking of photos, we actually have
Yeah.
some
Okay.
photos of your aircraft. We'll see if we can get our
Okay.
crew to bring them up, and you can walk us through, tell
Okay,
us
sure.
what you have. And while we're waiting for that, I'll just say one thing that years ago I got to visit the Spruce Goose, if you remember the
Mhm.
Spruce
Right,
Goose.
yes.
And what struck me was how primitive it was.
Yes.
Right.
And I'm sure that as we look at these images, if you get there to the museum and look at the inside, they probably do look incredibly primitive by modern standards.
Right.
Right.
They do.
So anyway, let's see what we
Okay.
got here. So we got, here's your logo.
Right.
Preserving the dream. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, it's preserving the historical, artifacts, as I like to say. We get calls a lot of times from, for years it was widows of a veteran or children saying, I got all this stuff at home, or sometimes all this junk. I don't want to throw it out, and they'll donate it. So we have 4 buildings where we have a lot of artifacts that we put on display. In fact, we have more. We have over 300 airplane models that people build, and we'll get calls from a guy, well, I made all these models, my wife wants me to get rid of them, but I don't want to throw them out. So we're not able to, of course, display them all at once, but we have a large collection.
If I'd known
of
about
that.
this 40 years ago when my mother threw out all my
Yeah.
old
Oh,
model
yeah.
airplanes,
Too
would
late.
have had a place for it.
Yeah.
So Ken, what are we looking at here? This actually, if we can go
This-
back one slide here, we had a picture of what I think was a German
Right.
fighter aircraft up. If we
Right,
can
that's
have our
one of the-
crew go,
that's
go
a-
back one
yeah.
slide. There we go.
Yeah, that's a replica of a Messerschmitt Me-109. We have 3 replicas in the museum, 4 replicas in the museum that are basically hand built, and they don't fly obviously, but they're actually of World War II aircraft. Since there's very few non-flyable World War II aircraft
yeah.
around.
So
that's
the
one of
replicas, how close are they to
They're the full size. It was originally made by a person that had the actual planes in the 60s. And he made full-size replicas and opened a restaurant chain. And there was one of the chain restaurant was up at Kwiatkowski Airport on the north suburbs, and it was called 95th Aero Squadron. And the place we got our 4 airplanes was the restaurant in Maryland closed. And the guy that got them called us up and he says, I got these planes, I need someplace to display them.
We'll take them, give them to us.
Yes, and so we have a loan agreement with him, and he brought them, he had to take them apart. They're fiberglass on top of steel struts.
Okay.
And the story is we think they're heavier than the original plane, because the original planes
Yeah.
are aluminum. These are
Right.
steel, and
Yeah.
they're pretty heavy. And so he brought them in semis, and they took them apart, and we put them back together. But you got to get within 10 feet to tell they're fake.
yeah.
And if we don't tell people,
You wouldn't know.
you wouldn't know.
No,
We've
no.
had people stop the car. How can you display an old plane like that outside? It's like, hold on.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's come back. So I think we had
Okay.
it. Now this was one of the workhorses of the Vietnam War.
Right. This is a Huey helicopter. We have 2 of them, and we actually own, the museum actually owns those. When they closed Glenview Naval Station back in mid-90s, the Army Reserve donated them to us with the understanding we would own them in 5 years. And we actually, there's a website you can go to, and if you put in the serial number, it'll tell you where it's served. And we did that recently, and we found that they both were used by the South Vietnamese Army in the 60s.
It's remarkable that we got them back into this country. So
Right.
many of those helicopters were ditched at the end of the war.
Right.
Right. It's so you're very lucky to actually have
Right.
these here.
And since we own it, we open up one of them actually and let the kids climb inside on the weekends when we're open.
And the adults too, we can climb inside.
And
Yes.
adults can't. You
Yeah,
got to
just-
watch your head, of course.
just
and
check.
stuff,
Yeah, yeah.
And it's interesting looking at all the gauges. And we actually, every year, we're in the Aurora's 4th of July parade. We put it up on a lowboy, and then we take it into downtown Aurora.
Lowboy is a truck of some sort.
A truck like
Yeah.
we're carrying bulldozers and stuff.
Yes. Okay.
And I was involved this current year on it, and the airspeed actually worked. We were going down the road, and we got up to 15 knots an hour, but we were going very slow because it
Yeah.
sits pretty high. We have to be very careful on all the wires, and we had a police
Sure.
escort. So we don't go to a lot of parades because of that.
Yeah.
We'd like to, at some point, try to get an actual helicopter trailer because it would sit lower, and then we could maybe do more.
Yeah, the Huey was also used about 3-4 years ago. The Moving Vietnam Memorial Wall came to the area, and we had our Huey out there next to it too as part of the display, which was very, very popular.
Sure, that's quite an honor I think, as well.
So the kids love going inside and climbing, and I always tell the kids, try to keep it under 9 feet, and they look at you like, what? Yeah.
So here, what we have here.
Okay. This is an A-7 Corsair II, and it was an attack aircraft used by the Navy, and it actually, this particular airplane actually flew in the first Iraq War back in '91. And we actually got some of the records from the pilot that flew it and some pictures when he was over in Iraq, and including his uniform.
Really? He's
Yes.
donated that now
Yeah.
to the
Yeah, to
museum.
send it to the museum.
So
yeah.
we got this plane back in '95 from the Navy. It was loaned to us. And at the time, the group, our museum group that was restoring it, they got into a really big battle on whether it should be in Navy colors, which is what it ended up being, or in desert colors. And they were almost,
So how was it flown? In desert colors? Or
probably during the Iraq War, it was probably more than
Desert
likely
color.
desert colors.
Yeah.
But it was decided to put it with Navy colors and stuff. And so, and we put up display stands next to it. We can't allow people inside because this is
Okay.
one of the aircraft on loan from the Navy.
Ah, yes, so you can't
And
damage
so
it in any way, right.
we can't let people climb inside it and stuff. So,
Understandable. So then
yeah.
we have.
All right, and
here-
then this is an F-4 Phantom, and this was the type of fighter that flew in the Vietnam War. And
No,
we
it's
got
interesting. That would be a novice.
Yeah.
That looks more modern to me than the previous one.
yeah.
I would have guessed that the previous one was actually like a Korean War
Right,
jet,
right.
But
Well, and part of it is when we restored this one, we used actually oil-based paint, while the other one we used latex. So it's held up better from the painting point of view. And actually, the Phantom was not retired until early '90s.
so
They
it might
use-
have. So not this particular plane.
Right.
This might, but that type of plane might have flown in the
Right.
first Iraq War as well, right?
Possibly.
Yeah. Okay.
And we got it from the Navy in 1998. And so it was down at a base down in Tennessee used for ejector seat training. So when we first got the plane, it had no seat. So we had to go back to the Navy and said, hey, we kind of need a seat to display it.
yeah.
So they finally provided one.
And this is another one that you cannot let anybody climb
Right,
on the
it's a
inside,
static.
Right?
And then this one is a Korean War era.
Okay.
And this is an extremely rare aircraft. There's only 2 left in the world. And it's an RF-86. And the R stands for reconnaissance, and the F, of course, for fighter. And if you look at each side of the cockpit there, there's a little bulge on the side.
Cameras.
And those are cameras. So they would fly over North Korea taking pictures of the enemy. And this is probably, pre-U2, so that
Yeah,
was the
yeah.
spy plane. And so we got this in approximately 98 too, and we restored it and painted it. And this was the type of jet that John Glenn would have flown during the Korea
During the
War.
okay.
Now, I don't think
But
he
he
flew
would-
reconnaissance.
right,
He
he
did a
would've-
fighter.
the actual fighter,
So it would be
right.
an F-86.
Right.
But
And this. So do you own this? That particular
no, that's
plane?
on loan from the Navy again.
So interesting. So you get something from the Navy on loan, and you guys do all the restoration of it,
Yes.
but the Navy still owns it.
Right.
Yeah, everybody wins on
Rules
that.
are- rules
You're
are
okay.
rules,
Yeah,
yeah.
I get it. Yeah. And so then this last one,
Okay.
another replica, right?
All right, so this is another replica. This is a P-40 Flying Tiger. A lot of people will remember it
But
from.
the Flying Tigers actually were a group of pilots, right? Not a
Yeah, out
type
of China,
airplane.
right.
Yeah.
But they were the ones that primary flew the, and that's not entirely true. The P-40 was in the European theater, and it was used by the U.S. too. The Flying Tigers were actually a volunteer that fought with
Predated
the Chinese
our entry
before the
into the
war,
war.
right?
Right.
And they painted this shark like,
Just as a little intimidation tactic.
right
I'm
to the
sure.
Japanese. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. And that plane flew in the early parts of the war, but later was supplanted by, what, the P-51
P-51
Mustang?
Mustang.
P-51.
Yeah, the P-47 Thunderbolt, which we have a replica also, was the initial escort planes for the B-17 bombers into Germany. The only problem with that is that it had a limited fuel supply. So it would get crossed into Germany, and then it'd have to turn around and go back home, and then left the B-17s by
Alone.
themselves as they're going into Berlin and into
Well,
the...
that's a problem for an escort aircraft, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
So, and then when the P-51 came along, they were
They had
able to
longer
go all
range.
of
Range,
it. They were
yeah.
able to go right into Berlin and to the other bombing sites and come back with bombers. So we lost a lot
Yeah.
less bombers at that time.
Yeah, and the P-51 was well, it was developed in response to the Japanese Zero, wasn't it? Wasn't that how that came about?
Well, it came out towards the end of the war. There were several aircraft that were developed to fight the Zero, because the Zero, the U.S. didn't really know about it until the actual war started, and it was a very light, very maneuverable plane, and our planes were a lot slower. But unfortunately, the Japanese had one design flaw in it. They designed it to be fast and maneuverable, but not safe. So if it got shot, like our aircraft had the gas tanks that they were reinforced so they wouldn't blow up
And
if
armor,
you shoot them.
right.
The Zero, you shoot the gas tank and it blows up. So you had to have a certain type of way you would fight the Zeros because they could outmaneuver you and be faster.
But there was a way to fight back.
And so the pilots had to learn to fight that way. And
Yeah.
after a while, and as our planes start getting, more improved models, then we eventually caught up and passed them.
Now, is there any chance that you guys could get a German Me-262, the first jet fighters? Any chance?
We would love to get a
Yeah.
lot of aircraft,
Yeah.
but there again, limited funds.
Yeah, and limited supply.
And
Yeah. So I'm
So-
sorry, Ken, you were about
When we
to
were
say.
talking about the Pacific Theater with the Zeros, most of the fighting of the aircraft during that time was done by the Navy. And so there were Grumman aircraft, the Wildcat, the Bearcat, the
Corsair,
Hellcat,
yeah.
the F4U Corsair. They did most of the hand-to-hand combat with the Japanese aircraft, whereas the P-51 was mostly in the European theater as an escort plane. But yeah, most of the stuff that occurred in the Pacific was done by the Navy off their carriers.
So let's talk a little bit about the future of the museum and how you plan to advance it and grow it in the future.
Yeah.
So where are we going from here?
One of the things that we've been working on pretty hard, and I have done it along with a few other board members, is really trying to get out in the community. I've participated in events with other organizations, the DuPage Veterans Foundation, and I go to a lot of air shows, and I work with other people at other air shows and other museums where we can kind of, here's some of our brochures, take some of yours, and try to do joint events. So I've done events with the EAA chapters, both in Aurora.
What's the EAA?
Experimental Aircraft Association, which is the organization that runs the big air show that's going on this week in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. That's basically from pilots, owners, everything to do with aviation. And each town probably has several chapters at different airports. And I've done fundraisers and such with the chapters at Lewis Airport and Romeoville, Aurora and such. So trying to get a liaison between the aircraft people, because we're all in this together and we all have the same interests. We do a lot of school groups. We encourage to try to get people not only from schools, senior centers, just to basically come and learn about the history, both of the memorabilia plus the aircraft itself. Our future goal, we would love to have a building that encloses the aircraft.
Because right now they're all out.
Right
Outside.
now,
the
they're all to the elements, and a lot of our time and expenses are with maintaining them, repainting and maintenance and things of that nature. What our future goal, besides having the building that one will close the aircraft, is we want to develop a veteran center that could be incorporated with that building to house the aircraft, where vets and their families can have birthdays, weddings, anniversaries, things where they can go, and that's been our goal, to try to find funding for that type of
How
thing.
successful have you been?
It's
to
been
date?
very difficult. I mean, because like I say, we're basically a shoestring budget
And volunteer driven.
and volunteer driven. So we would love to have, if anybody with a business or a corporation that's interested in helping vets and also helping preserve history
So
and
anybody
education.
who's watching this show is encouraged to contact you.
Please,
Yes.
yeah, because that's our main thing to go. Because one, it'll keep the aircraft in the museum going for generations, and also we want to give, since so many of our members and even board members are veterans, we'd like to give back to their families and help them along also.
Well,
too.
speaking of multiple generations, I mean, how do you work with succession planning? I mean, everybody gets older, right, including us.
Right.
So how will you pass this on, recruit new board members, continue to get volunteers to come in?
And that's a big concern of ours.
Yeah.
Like I said, for years, the majority of the volunteers were World War II vets. Well, they're all gone now.
Yeah.
And now we have Vietnam era veterans, and trying to get younger people to join is, with a lot of organizations, I think we're finding in the U.S. it's getting harder. We tend to get a lot of pilots who either flew in the military and now are commercial pilots, and then as they retire, because a lot of them it's a retirement type hobby,
Sure.
to be a docent and stuff. But history, I joined because I love history, and I wasn't a pilot. I'd love to be, but two things get in the way: time and money. And
And actually, Ken, are you a pilot?
No, I'm not, but I'm somewhat in the aviation family. My father was a aircraft mechanic on 3 aircraft carriers in Korea, and my son is a pilot.
Oh,
So
okay.
I kind of skipped a generation,
blood,
but
yeah.
my love for aviation
Yeah.
was passed on, that way.
Yeah, so, sadly, for
Right.
better or worse, veterans will continue to come in and out of service, right?
Right.
Because
Right, exactly.
the world is the world, and we'll continue to have veterans.
Right.
So I can see, well, that's a steady supply of people coming in and to be board members. But how do you preserve, like, the history? I mean, the people who know about the individual planes, like the World War II vets who would have flown this type of aircraft, they're gone, and so
Right.
the people
Well,
coming
and that's
in.
a lot of our displays. We've reserved that by interviewing them, and we have storyboards that talk about the person's experience during the war and stuff. In fact, about 6 years ago, I was approached by someone. She said, "My dad has this collection of aviation magazines from the 20s, 30s, and 40s."
Wow, back to
And-
the 20s.
Yeah, and he
Wow.
didn't want to have it thrown out,
Yeah.
and so they asked, "Would you be interested in if we donate it to the museum?" I said, "Yes, we would, because it's preserving history."
Sure.
And as I talked to her, the story about her dad, why he wasn't a pilot, but he was involved in aviation research and in the war. And I said, "You should do a display and then donate it to the museum." And so I helped her work out a format. She basically did 9 PowerPoint slides and then put it in a display case telling the story of her dad. And they presented us, about 6 years ago on Thanksgiving when the whole family was in, and it's one of our displays now. And one of the cute stories was when he was in the Army during the war. He was with a buddy, and the buddy was showing him a picture of his girlfriend, and Gerald said, "Who's the cutie next to her?" And it turned out he ended up marrying her as a wife. So that's part of the storyboard.
Sure,
I mean,
sure.
and stories like that.
So we really need younger people, and that's one reason we're trying to focus on, school age
Outreach,
and
yeah,
to
sure.
get them to spark a little bit of interest. And there are so many opportunities for people who become members for volunteering, whether it be, taking somebody around the museum. We have a full reference library, working in a library, doing maintenance on the planes. There's always something to do, other things around the museum. So that's, we really encourage to get new members.
Right.
One of our,
Do you have a training program, for example? So if someone wanted to come in and do maintenance, not everybody can know what to do, right? So when you
right,
train
yeah,
It's kind of like a mentor type,
Yeah.
Okay.
show 'em. I mean, we're not doing major repair because the planes will never fly,
Right.
but it's just the upkeep and how the appearance. We've actually rehabbed 2 of the replicas so they look even brand new because they need it, because they're being taken
'Cause they're-
apart several times.
and they're stored outside.
Yeah, and they're stored outside, so
right.
they look even nicer now.
one of our younger members who actually restored the Warhawk. He also flew in the Slovakian Air Force, and this year he opened we opened our newest exhibit, which is a history and such of the Czech Air Force. And there are a lot of things in this museum, even though it's relatively small by most standards, that are very unique and one of a kind.
On that note,
Yes.
it's a great way to finish up because
Good.
we're out of time.
Okay.
Okay.
So,
All right. Well,
Ken,
thank you very
Bill,
much.
thank you so much for
All
being
right,
here. It's
and
been a
thank
pleasure.
you for having
Thank you
us.
for
And I'll have to
inviting
come out
us.
and take a look at the
Okay,
museum.
please
do. Yes.
All right.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us once again on Public Perspective. I'm your host, Kevin McDermott. You can find us every Saturday night at 8 on Comcast Channel 19 or see us on the web at publicperspective.tv. So till next time, thank you and good night.